The heat in the Arizona territory did not just sit on you. It leaned against you, heavy and smelling of dry sage and ancient dust. It was 1884, and the town of Rattler's Ford was less a settlement and more a scar carved into the earth alongside the Colorado River. It was a place where the law was often written in lead and sealed with whiskey, and where a young woman like Clara Whitlow was expected to be as silent and yielding as the shadow of the mesa at noon. Clara, known to everyone as Clary, wiped her forehead with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of flour across her brow. The air inside her Aunt Mabel's trading post was thick and still, trapped between the rough-hewn log walls. Outside, the sun was a white blister in the sky, baking the mud of the main street into a surface as hard as iron. 2 pounds of flour, a sack of coffee, and 5 yards of calico, Clary said aloud, her voice steady despite the weariness in her legs. She wrote the items down in the heavy ledger on the counter. She did not write the numbers as figures. Her father had taught her that numbers were cold, but words had weight. She wrote $2.50 in her neat, looping script. The customer, a miner with eyes like chips of flint and a beard that looked like a bird's nest, grunted. He placed $3 silver on the counter. "Keep the change. Girl, buy yourself a ribbon." Clary looked at the silver coins. They were heavy, cool to the touch. She slid the 50 cents back across the wood. "We do not take tips for honest trade. Mr. Eubanks, the price is the price." He looked at her, surprised by the steel in the voice of a girl who was only 18 years old. He shrugged, pocketed the coin, and hauled his supplies out into the blinding light. Clary exhaled, brushing a stray lock of hair from her eyes. She was slender, but there was a wiry strength to her frame, born of hauling water and breaking horses when her father was still alive. Her hands were not soft. They were calloused from the reins in the pen. She looked down at the ledger. The black ink told a grim story. The column of debts was longer than the column of earnings. "Is he gone?" Aunt Mabel's voice came from the back room. "Yes, Auntie," Clary called back. Mabel emerged, wiping her hands on a stained apron. She was a woman who had once been pretty, but the frontier had worn her down like wind against sandstone. Her eyes were always darting to the door, expecting bad news. "Did Vernon Pike come by?" "Not today," Clary said, closing the book. "But the week is not over." "He will come," Mabel whispered, sinking onto a stool. "He always comes." Vernon Pike ran the freight line and half the businesses in Rattler's Ford that did not involve the church. He was a man of appetites, and lately, his appetite had turned toward the trading post and the debt Mabel's late husband had left behind. But Clary knew it was not just the land Pike wanted. Last week, Pike had leaned over the counter, his breath smelling of stale tobacco, and looked Clary up and down as if she were a mare at an auction. "A girl needs a husband to settle her accounts," he had said. "Your auntie is tired. Clary, you could make things easy for her." Clary felt a cold knot in her stomach just thinking about it. She walked over to the window and looked out at the river. The water was running brown and fast. The Colorado was the lifeblood of this land, but it was also a barrier. To the north lay the Black Mesa and the Navajo lands, a place the townsfolk spoke of with fear and superstition. "I will not marry him, Auntie," Clary said quietly, without turning around. "I will work until my fingers bleed. I will break every horse in the county if I have to. But I will not be paying the debt," Mabel sighed, a sound like dry leaves skittering. "Oh, Clary, you have your father's stubborn heart. But out here, a woman without a man is like a calf without a herd. The wolves do not care about your pride." "Then I will learn to bite back," Clary said. She left the counter and went out the back door to the small corral where her horse, a roan gelding named Dusty, stood dozing in the shade. This was her sanctuary. When she was on Dusty's back, riding along the ridge where the wind stripped away the smell of the town, she felt like she belonged to herself. She checked his hooves, lifting each leg with practiced ease. "You smell it too, don't you, boy?" she murmured. Dusty nickered and stamped a foot. The air was changing. The relentless blue sky was beginning to bruise with purple clouds gathering over the high peaks to the north. A storm was coming. Not a Dusty squall, but a true mountain storm that would swell the river until it roared like a dragon. Later that afternoon, the bell above the door chimed, but it was not Vernon Pike who entered. It was Deputy Silas Crow. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Crow was a tall man, impeccably dressed for a frontier lawman. His vest was clean, his badge polished until it gleamed like a second sun, and his boots were free of mud. He was handsome in a sharp, predatory way, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Miss Whitlow," Crow said, taking off his hat. His hair was slicked back with oil. "Mrs. Miller." "Deputy," Clary said, keeping the counter between them. "Can I help you?" "Just making my rounds," Crow said, his voice smooth, like oil pouring over gravel. "Checking on the good citizens of Rattler's Ford, hearing whispers, you know." "Whispers?" Mabel asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Indians," Crow said, the word dropping like a stone. "Raiders coming down from the mesa, Navajo. They say a few braves have gone rogue, robbing supply lines, stealing cattle." Clary narrowed her eyes. "I have not seen any Navajo in months, Deputy. Not since the last trade fair." Crow turned his gaze on her. It felt physical, like a hand gripping her chin. "They are crafty, Miss Whitlow. They move like ghosts. But do not worry. I have spoken to the mayor. We're going to expand the jurisdiction, clean up the roads, make this land safe for decent folk to settle." "Safe for settlers, or safe for the land speculators?" Clary asked before she could stop herself. Mabel gasped. "Clary!" Crow chuckled. A low, dry sound. "Sharp tongue. I admire that. But be careful, my dear. A tongue that is too sharp can cut its own throat. This is a dangerous time. You two ladies, all alone out here on the edge of town. It worries me. You need protection." "We have a shotgun," Clary said. "A shotgun is fine," Crow said, placing his hands on the counter. "But the law is better. You tell Pike I said hello if you see him. We are working closely to ensure stability." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Keep your doors locked tonight. The river is rising, and the rats come out when the water gets high." When he was gone, Clary felt a shiver that had nothing to do with the heat. Crow was not protecting the town. He was curating it. He was clearing the board so men like Pike could buy it up for pennies. And the Navajo raider stories were just the excuse he needed to deputize thugs and ride where he pleased. Night fell, bringing no relief from the heat, only a heavy, suffocating darkness. The clouds had swallowed the moon. The wind began to pick up, whistling through the gaps in the logs. Clary could not sleep. She sat by the window in her small loft, reading by the light of a flickering kerosene lamp. The book was Great Expectations, a battered copy her father had carried in his saddlebags for years. She read the words, but her mind was on the river. A low rumble of thunder sounded in the distance, vibrating through the floorboards. Then she heard another sound, the creak of wood and the jingle of harness chains. Clary blew out the lamp and moved to the window. The trading post sat near the main road that ran parallel to the river. Below, in the gloom, a line of wagons was moving. Not the usual freight wagons that came during the day, loud and boisterous. These moved slowly, their wheels wrapped in rags to muffle the sound on the hard-packed earth. She squinted. There were 4 wagons. Riders flanked them, holding torches that smoked in the damp wind. As the lead wagon passed a patch of light from the saloon down the road, Clary saw the cargo, barrels, dozens of them. But it was not just flour or oil. She knew the shape of whiskey barrels. And next to them, long, heavy crates that looked suspiciously like the ones the army used for ammunition. What caught her breath was the lead rider. He turned in the saddle, and for a second, the torchlight illuminated his face. It was Deputy Crow, and riding beside him, looking nervous, was Vernon Pike. They were heading north, toward the reservation border. Smugglers, Clary whispered to herself. It made perfect sense. Crow screamed about Navajo raiders to scare the town, while he and Pike ran illegal whiskey and guns right through the territory to stir up trouble, justifying the very violence Crow claimed to prevent. It was a circle of blood. and they were drawing it for profit. The injustice of it burned in her chest, hot and sharp. Aunt Mabel was terrified of debt, while these men were printing money by selling chaos. Clary gripped the windowsill until her knuckles turned white. She wanted to scream, to run down there and confront them, but she knew that would be suicide. She was just a girl in a town owned by the men she hated. The wagons disappeared into the dark, heading toward the dangerous pass near the river bend. The storm finally broke an hour later. It did not start with a drizzle, but with a deluge. Rain hammered the roof like handfuls of gravel thrown by an angry giant. Lightning tore the sky open, bleaching the world in stark, strobe light flashes of white and black. Clary gave up on sleep. She dressed in her work clothes, a heavy cotton skirt and a sturdy shirt, and went downstairs. The wind was howling now, and she could hear the river roaring. The Colorado was no longer a road. It was a weapon. She grabbed a lantern and threw a heavy oilskin poncho over her shoulders. "I'm just going to check the stock," she whispered to the empty room. Though her aunt was fast asleep in the back, she needed to see the water. Her father had always said the river spoke if you knew how to listen. Tonight, it was screaming. Clary fought her way against the wind to the edge of the bank behind the trading post. The river had risen 5 feet in a matter of hours. The dark water churned, carrying whole trees that had been ripped from the banks upstream. The sound was deafening, a constant, grinding roar of earth and water. Lightning flashed, illuminating the chaotic surface. The wooden bridge further downriver looked fragile, a matchstick structure against the might of the flood. Clary stood there, the rain soaking her hair instantly, plastering it to her cheeks. She felt small, but also strangely alive. This power, the storm. The river was honest. It did not lie like Crow or scheme like Pike. It just was. Then, she heard it, above the roar of the water and the boom of thunder. A sound cut through the night. A horse. Not the angry scream of a wild stallion, but the terrified, high-pitched whinny of an animal in mortal distress. Clary raised her lantern, shielding her eyes from the stinging rain. She scanned the turbulent water. "Where are you?" she shouted, her voice lost in the wind. Another flash of lightning, brighter than the last, seared the sky. There, about 30 yards out, caught in a tangle of driftwood and debris spinning in a violent eddy, was a shape. It was not a horse. The horse must have already been swept away or drowned. It was a man. He was clinging to a massive, uprooted cottonwood trunk that was bobbing and rolling in the current. He was barely visible, a dark smudge against the frothing brown water. Clary's heart hammered against her ribs. He was being pulled toward the rocky outcroppings where the river narrowed. If he hit those rocks, he would be crushed instantly. She stepped closer to the edge, the mud slick under her boots. The sensible part of her brain, the part that listened to Aunt Mabel, screamed at her to turn back. "Go inside, lock the door. It is not your business. You will die." But then the lightning flashed again. The logs spun. The man's grip was slipping. He turned his face toward the bank, perhaps seeing her lantern, perhaps just looking for a last glimpse of the world. He was not a townsman. Even in the chaos, she saw the long, dark hair plastered to his skull, the glint of copper skin, the distinct weave of the shirt that was shredded across his shoulder. A Navajo. One of the raiders Crow had warned about. Clary froze. If she saved him, she would bring the enemy to her door. She was inviting the very danger everyone feared. But as the log lurched, she saw something else. He was not fighting with the rage of a warrior. He was fighting with the desperation of a human being who was hurt and drowning. And then, just before the darkness swallowed him again, something washed up onto the mud at her feet. It was not driftwood. Clary looked down. It was a saddlebag, torn and waterlogged. Entangled in its strap was a piece of fabric, a strip of woven wool, patterned in red and black, soaking wet, and it was stained with fresh, bright blood. The horse had been shot. The man was wounded. This was not an accident of nature. This was the result of men. Clary looked back at the river. The man's head went under. "No," Clary said. The word was ripped from her throat. "Not tonight. Not on my watch." She did not think about the debt. She did not think about Vernon Pike or Deputy Crow. She did not think about the fact that she was 18 years old and weighed 110 pounds soaking wet. She threw the lantern onto the high ground, grabbed the coil of heavy hemp rope that always hung by the dock post, and tied one end around the sturdy trunk of an ancient mesquite tree. She looped the other end around her waist, cinching it tight until it bit into her ribs. The thunder cracked overhead, a sound like the sky breaking in two. Clary Whitlow took a breath that tasted of rain and ozone. Then, with a cry that was swallowed by the storm, she launched herself into the boiling darkness of the river. The cold shock of the water was absolute. It did not feel like liquid. It felt like a solid wall slamming into Clary's chest, punching the breath from her lungs. The current grabbed her legs instantly, sweeping them out from under her with terrifying force. The rope around her waist snapped taut, biting into her skin even through the thick oilskin and wool. She gasped, swallowing a mouthful of gritty, mud-thick water. The noise was overwhelming, a chaotic symphony of crashing waves, grinding stones, and the wind shrieking like a banshee. Panic flared, a bright, hot spark in the freezing dark. I am going to die, she thought. I am going to be battered against the rocks and drowned. But then she saw him again. The lightning flickered, illuminating the man clinging to the spinning log. He was closer now, washed toward the bank by the unpredictable eddy. But his grip was failing. His head dipped under, then resurfaced. Gasping. "Hold on," Clary screamed, though she knew he could not hear her. She fought the current, kicking her legs, her boots feeling like lead weights. The rope held her tethered to the mesquite tree on the bank, allowing her to swing out into the flow like a pendulum. She reached out, her fingers clawing at the water. The log surged past her. She missed it. "No!" she cried, frustration tearing at her throat. She hauled herself back against the current, the rope burning her waist. She had one more chance. The eddy was swirling him back around, but this time it would carry him past her and straight into the main channel, where the river was a killing machine. She timed it. 1 breath. 2 breaths. She lunged. Her hand struck wet wood, slipping on the slime-slicked bark. She scrabbled desperately, her fingernails tearing, until her hand closed around something solid, a wrist. It was warm, alive. The weight of him hit her instantly, threatening to drag her under. The river roared its protest, pulling at them both with renewed fury. Clary gritted her teeth, bracing her feet against a submerged rock that felt slippery as ice. She pulled. "Help me," she shouted at him, not knowing if he was conscious enough to understand. The man's eyes opened. In the darkness, they were dark pools reflecting the lightning. He seemed to focus on her face, confusion warring with pain. Then, instinct took over. His hand clamped around her forearm, a grip of surprising strength. "Pull!" Clary screamed, leveraging her weight back toward the bank. Slowly, agonizingly, they moved. The river fought for every inch, but the rope held, and Clary's determination held harder. She dragged him out of the main current, into the shallows, where the water was only knee-deep, but still ferocious. She fell back onto the mud, gasping, her chest heaving. He collapsed beside her, half in the water, half on the bank. He was coughing, racking spasms that shook his whole body, spitting up river water. Clary scrambled to her knees, grabbing his shoulders to haul him fully onto the grass. He was heavy, dense with muscle, but she found strength. She rolled him onto his back. He was a warrior, there was no mistaking it. Even exhausted and half-drowned, he had a dangerous grace about him. He wore buckskin leggings and a calico shirt that was torn and soaked. His hair was long, heavy with water and mud. But it was the wound that caught her eye. His side was a mess of blood. The water had washed some of it away, but fresh crimson was already welling up, staining his shirt. A gunshot wound, a graze, maybe deeper. He groaned, his hand going to his side. His eyes found hers again. They were guarded, sharp with pain and suspicion. "You," he rasped, his voice raw. "Why? Save your breath," Clary said, her own voice trembling. She looked around. The storm was still raging, masking their presence. But for how long? Can you walk? We cannot stay here. He nodded tightly. He tried to rise, but his legs buckled. Clary caught him, her shoulder jamming under his arm. "Lean on me," she ordered. Together. They stumbled through the rain toward the trading post. Clary avoided the front entrance. If anyone was watching from the road, if Crow was still prowling, they would be seen. She led him around the back, past the chicken coop where the hens were huddled in silent terror, to the old barn. It was a sturdy structure, smelling of dry hay and horses. She pushed the heavy door open and guided him inside, kicking it shut behind them and throwing the latch. The silence of the barn was sudden and startling after the roar of the river. The only sound was the rain drumming on the roof and their own ragged breathing. Clary helped him to a pile of fresh hay in the corner, hidden behind a stack of crates. He sank down with a hiss of pain, leaning his head back against the wood. "I need light," Clary whispered. "And bandages. Stay here. Do not make a sound." She ran to the tack room, grabbing a lantern, a clean horse blanket, and the small wooden box where her father had kept his veterinary supplies. It was not a doctor's kit, but it had carbolic acid, clean linen, and a needle and thread. When she returned, she lit the lantern, keeping the flame low. The golden light washed over him. He was watching her, his hand resting near the knife at his belt. "I am not going to hurt you," Clary said, keeping her hands where he could see them. "I am going to clean that wound." He hesitated, then slowly moved his hand away from the weapon. Clary knelt beside him. She used her knife to carefully cut away the ruined shirt. The wound was an ugly furrow along his ribs. The bullet had passed through. Thank God, but it had torn muscle and skin. It was bleeding sluggishly now. "This will sting," she warned, unstoppering the bottle of carbolic acid. He did not flinch when she poured the disinfectant over the raw flesh. His jaw tightened until the muscles jumped, and he let out a sharp exhale through his nose. But he made no sound. Clary admired that. Most of the cowboys who came through town whined like children over a splinter. As she worked, cleaning the blood and binding his ribs tight with strips of linen, she noticed something bulkier under his sash. He flinched when her hand brushed it. "What is this?" she asked. He grabbed her wrist. His grip was not aggressive, but it was firm. "Something that kills people," he said quietly. Clary looked at him. A gun. Worse, truth. He reached into his sash and pulled out a small, leather-bound notebook. It was wrapped in oilcloth to keep it dry, sealed with a glob of red wax that had been cracked. He held it for a second, then handed it to her. Clary took it, her fingers trembling slightly. She unwrapped the oilcloth. The notebook was cheap, the kind sold for 5 cents at any general store. She opened it to a random page. The handwriting was cramped, hasty, but the words were clear. August 12th, 400 crates, whiskey, delivered to V. Pike, payment received $2,000 gold. August 15th, 100 rifles, Springfield models, Army surplus, destination Northern Pass. She flipped the pages, dates, amounts, names. It was a ledger of illegal trade, and the names were damning. Pike, Miller, Eubanks, and on every few pages, a signature signing off on the security of the transport SC, Silas Crow. Clary felt the blood drain from her face. This was not just smuggling. This was treason. Selling guns to agitators, selling whiskey on the reservation, these were federal crimes. And Crow, the man wearing the badge, was the one ensuring it happened. "You took this from them," she whispered, looking up at him. "I took it from the man who drives the wagon," he said. His voice was gaining a little strength. "We have been watching. They bring poison to my people. Whiskey that makes men mad, guns that bring soldiers. We wanted it to stop." "We?" Clary asked. A shadow passed over his face. "I am the only one left." The weight of his words settled on her. He had watched his friends die for this book. And now, he was here, in her barn, bleeding on her hay. "They will come for this," Clary said, closing the book. "Crow. He knows you have it. He knows someone has it, the warrior said. He does not know I am alive. Yet, suddenly, the horses in the stalls stamped nervously. A dog barked outside, sharp, aggressive barks. Then, a heavy pounding on the front door of the trading post. Clary jumped, nearly dropping the lantern. "Stay here," she hissed. "Do not move. Do not make a sound. No matter what you hear." She blew out the lantern and ran out of the barn, locking it from the outside. She sprinted through the rain to the back door of the main house, slipping inside just as the pounding started again. "Miss Whitlow, open up. It is the law." It was Crow. Clary took a deep breath, smoothing her wet hair. Though she knew she looked like a drowned rat, she grabbed a shawl and wrapped it around her shoulders to hide her shivering. She walked to the front door and unbolted it. Crow stood there, water streaming from the brim of his hat. He had 2 other men with him, deputies, or at least men wearing badges for the night. They held lanterns that hissed in the rain. "Deputy Crow," Clary said, feigning sleepiness. "What on earth is happening? It is the middle of the night." Crow pushed past her into the dry warmth of the store, his boots leaving muddy tracks on the floorboards. He looked around, his eyes scanning the room like a hawk hunting mice. "Apologies for the intrusion, Miss Whitlow," he said, though he did not sound sorry. "But we have a situation. A dangerous fugitive, a Navajo brave. He killed a man tonight down by the river bend. We tracked him this way." "A killer?" Clary put a hand to her throat. "Here." "My men found tracks," Crow said. He stepped closer to her. He smelled of rain, wet wool, and bay rum. "Tracks leading up from the riverbank, near your dock." Clary's heart hammered against her ribs so hard she feared he could hear it. I was out there," she said. "Just a while ago. The river was so loud. I was worried about the bridge. I went to check the water level." Crow stared at her. "You went out in this storm?" "My father built that dock," Clary said, lifting her chin. "I wanted to make sure it held." Crow looked at her wet hair, her muddy boots. He seemed to weigh her words. "Did you see anything?" "Clary, anyone. A man in the water, someone running." This was the moment. The precipice. If she told him, she would be a good citizen. She would be safe. Crow would pat her on the head, go to the barn, and drag the wounded man out. The justice would be swift a rope over a cottonwood branch. But she thought of the notebook. S.C. She thought of the blood on the warrior's side. She thought of the way he had looked at her, not with hate, but with a desperate, human plea. Clary looked Deputy Crow in the eye and lied for the first time in her life. "No, Deputy," she said. "I saw nothing but the river. It was too dark. And the noise, I could not hear myself think." Crow held her gaze for a long, agonizing silence. His eyes were cold, calculating. He knew she was hiding something. Or perhaps he just suspected everyone of hiding something. "Check the perimeter," Crow barked to his men. "Check the shed. Check the woodpile. The barn," one of the men asked. Clary stopped breathing. "No," Crow said, surprisingly. He turned back to Clary, a thin smile playing on his lips. "Miss Whitlow keeps that barn locked tight. Don't you, Clary? To keep the wolves out." "Always," Clary whispered. "Good girl." Crow said. He tipped his hat. "If you see anything at all, you come to me straight away. This savage is dangerous. He is desperate. He will hurt you." "I understand," Clary said. "We will be watching," Crow said, "for your safety." He turned and marched out into the rain, his men following. Clary bolted the door and leaned against it, her legs giving way. She slid down to the floor, burying her face in her hands. She was shaking uncontrollably. She waited until the sound of their horses faded before she dared to move. She crept back out to the barn, the rain feeling colder now. She slipped inside and lit the lantern again. The warrior was sitting up, his back against a post. He had the notebook in his hand. He looked at her, and his expression had changed. The suspicion was still there, but the edge was duller. "They are gone," Clary said, her voice hollow. "For now," he said. He knows, Clary said, pacing the small space. He knows I was lying. I could see it in his eyes. He is playing with me, like a cat with a mouse. He is waiting for me to make a mistake, the man said, or for you to make one. Clary looked at him. Who are you, really? I am Kai, he said. Kai Nez. I am Clary, she said. Clary, he repeated. The name sounded strange and soft on his tongue. You should have told him. You should have given me up. He is a criminal, Clary said fiercely. He is using the law to break the law. I saw his name in that book. I will not help a man like that kill an innocent man. Kai looked at the notebook, then at her. There are no innocent men in this war, Clary, but you have done a dangerous thing tonight. I know, she said. If you keep me here, they will come back, Kai said. His voice was steady, a statement of fact devoid of fear. When they realize I am not a downriver, they will circle back. They will search this place properly, and they will not ask you nicely next time. They will not ask if you agree. Clary looked at the bandages on his chest, white against his copper skin. She looked at the door where the darkness pressed in. She realized that the life she had known, the ledger, the flour sacks, the quiet days of worrying about debt was gone. It had washed away in the flood. Then we cannot be here when they come back, Clary said. Kai looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his dark eyes. You cannot ride, Clary said. You can barely stand. You need help. I do not need a girl to. I pulled you out of that river, Kai Nez, Clary interrupted, her voice sharp. I stitched your side. I lied to the deputy for you. I am not just a girl anymore. I am your accomplice. She walked over to the tack wall and pulled down her saddlebags. Get some sleep, she said. We leave before dawn. Kai watched her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. He lay back down in the hay, clutching the notebook to his chest like a shield. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the barn, the air was heavy with the weight of a choice made and a destiny that had just begun to unfold. The days that followed were measured not in hours, but in heartbeats. The barn, once a place of dust and dry silence, had become the center of Clary's world. Outside, the sun beat down on Rattler's Ford with its usual indifference, baking the mud of the flood back into cracked earth. Inside, in the shadows of the hayloft, a fragile alliance was hardening into something dangerous and necessary. They had a routine, born of desperation. Clary would work the counter during the day, her smile brittle as she weighed sugar and cut tobacco for the very men who would hang the man hidden 50 feet away. At night, or during the lull of the afternoon heat, she would slip out to the barn with a canteen of fresh water and scraps of food hidden in her apron pocket. Kai was healing with the resilience of a man who had made pain a companion long ago. The fever that had threatened him the first night had broken, leaving him weak but clear-eyed. It was on the third afternoon that the air in the barn shifted. Clary was changing the dressing on his side. The wound was knitting, the angry red edges turning to the pink of new flesh. She knelt beside him in the straw, her hands moving with practiced care. She could feel the heat radiating from his skin, a steady, vital warmth that seemed to burn through the tips of her fingers. You have hands like the river, Kai said. His voice was low, a rumble in the quiet barn. Clary paused, the strip of clean linen suspended in the air. She looked up. He was watching her, his dark eyes unguarded for the first time. There was no suspicion there now, only a raw intensity that made her breath hitch in her throat. Cold and muddy, she asked, trying to keep her voice light, though her pulse was hammering against her ribs. Relentless, he corrected, and life-giving. He reached out, his hand closing gently around her wrist. His skin was rough, calloused from the reins and the rifle, but his touch was shockingly tender. He did not pull her. He just held her there, anchoring her. Clary felt the contact like a shock of static. She could see the pulse jumping in the hollow of his throat. She could smell the scent of him sage, leather, and the faint, metallic tang of the healing wound. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The dust motes dancing in the shaft of sunlight from the roof seemed to freeze. It was an intimacy sharper than any she had ever known. A silent acknowledgement that they were two people standing on the edge of a cliff, holding hands. I should finish this," Clary whispered, though she did not pull her wrist away. "You should," Kai agreed, but his thumb brushed the sensitive skin of her inner wrist, a slow, deliberate caress that sent a shiver straight down her spine. "But you are not afraid, Clary Whitlow. That is what surprises me." "I am terrified," she admitted softly. "No," he said, releasing her slowly. "You are aware. There is a difference." The spell was broken, not by them, but by the creak of the barn door. Clary spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. It was Aunt Mabel. The older woman stood in the doorway. A basket of laundry dropped at her feet, her mouth open in a silent scream. She stared at the Navajo warrior sitting in the hay, and then at her niece kneeling beside him. "Auntie, wait." Clary scrambled up, rushing toward her. Mabel stumbled back, her face draining of blood until it was the color of old parchment. You hid him here." "Clary, have you lost your mind?" "He is hurt, Auntie. I pulled him from the river. I could not let him die." "They will hang you," Mabel hissed, grabbing Clary's shoulders and shaking her. "Do you hear me? Crow will hang you, and then he will burn this place to the ground. You are harboring a savage." "He is not a savage," Clary said, her voice firm, surprising even herself. "His name is Kai, and he is the only honest man I have seen in this town in years. Honesty does not stop a bullet." Mabel began to weep, deep, terrified sobs. "Vernon Pike was here this morning. He knows something is wrong. He smells it like a coyote smells blood," as if summoned by her fear. The heavy thud of boots on the front porch of the trading post echoed through the yard. "Hello inside." It was Deputy Crow's voice. "Miss Whitlow." "We have business." Mabel clutched her chest. Oh, Lord, they are here." "Go inside," Clary ordered, her mind racing. "Wipe your face. Say nothing. I will handle it." Clary pushed her aunt toward the house and then turned back to Kai. He was already on his feet, the pain in his side ignored, his knife in his hand. "Stay down," she commanded. "Do not move unless I tell you." She ran to the house, smoothing her skirt and taking a deep breath to steady her shaking hands before she stepped into the main room. Crow was there, leaning against the counter, but he was not alone. Vernon Pike stood beside him, a man shaped like a barrel with a face like a clenched fist. Pike was chewing on a toothpick, his small eyes roaming over the shelves as if he already owned them. "Gentlemen," Clary said, "we were just closing for the midday heat." "Business does not sleep, little lady," Pike rumbled. He slapped a piece of paper onto the counter. "Your aunt is behind on the supplier payments. 3 months behind. That is $200. "We have until the harvest," Clary said. "That was the agreement." "Agreements change when the risk goes up," Crow said smoothly. He walked around the perimeter of the room, running a gloved finger along a sack of grain. "And the risk in Rattler's Ford is rising. Indians in the hills, smugglers on the river. A man needs to secure his assets." Pike leaned in, his breath sour with onions and whiskey. "There is a way to settle this. Clary, I've always had a soft spot for you. You need a man to run this place, a husband. You marry me, and the debt disappears. Your aunt lives out her days in peace." Clary felt bile rise in her throat. The trap was not just about money. It was about ownership. They were squeezing her from both sides, law and debt. "And if I refuse?" Clary asked, cold as ice. "Then I foreclose," Pike said, shrugging. "Tomorrow, and you two are on the street. And with the Indian scare, the street is a dangerous place for 2 women alone." Crow stopped near the back door, the door that led to the yard and the barn. "Speaking of the Indian scare," he said, "my men found blood on the riverbank this morning, near your dock. Clary, fresh blood." "I told you," Clary said, her mind spinning. "I cut my hand on the rope during the storm." "Show me your hands," Crow said. Clary froze. Her hands were calloused, stained with ink, but they were not cut. It healed, she stammered. A terrible lie. Crow smiled. A predator seeing the limp in a gazelle's gait. I think I will take a look in your storeroom, and maybe the barn, just to be thorough. He moved toward the back door. Panic exploded in Clary's chest. If he opened that door, he would see the trail of fresh footprints she had made. He would see the lock on the barn was undone. She needed chaos. She needed a disaster. Her eyes landed on the open 50-pound sack of flour sitting on the edge of the counter, ready for weighing. "Deputy, wait!" Clary cried out, lunging forward as if to stop him. She did not aim for him. She aimed for the sack. She collided with the counter, her hip slamming into the wood. Her arm swept out, catching the heavy sack. It tipped, teetered for a second, and then fell with a massive whump right between Pike and Crow. The explosion of white powder was instantaneous. A cloud of flour billowed up, thick as smoke, coating everything. Pike roared, coughing and sputtering as the white dust filled his mouth and nose. Crow stumbled back, blindingly waving his arms. His pristine black uniform instantly turned ghostly white. "You clumsy fool," Pike hacked, wiping flour from his eyes. "Look at my suit." "Oh, I am so sorry," Clary coughed, waving her hands to spread the dust even more. "I tripped. The floorboard, it is loose." The room was a fog of white. Crow was sneezing violently, his eyes watering. The dignity of the law was completely undone by baking goods. "Get out," Pike yelled, retreating to the fresh air of the porch. "We cannot breathe in here." Crow glared at Clary through the haze, his face red and streaked with white paste where the flour mixed with sweat. "This is not over, Miss Whitlow," he wheezed. "Tomorrow, noon. If the debt is not paid, Pike takes the deed, and I'll take a look in that barn." They retreated, coughing and cursing, retreating from the cloud of flour. Clary waited until they were gone, then slumped against the counter, her heart hammering like a trapped bird. She was covered in flour, looking like a ghost herself. She had bought 24 hours. No more. She went to the barn. Kai was waiting just inside the door. He had heard everything. "They have you cornered," he said quietly. "They want the land," Clary said, wiping flour from her eyelashes. "And they want me as a trophy to go with it?" "And the notebook?" Kai asked. "If Crow finds it, he kills us both. If he doesn't find it, Pike ruins us anyway." Clary looked at him. "Tell me, why is this book worth dying for?" Kai sat down on a crate. "It is not just whiskey," he said. "Crow is moving rifles. Hundreds of them. But he is not selling them to the tribes. He is planting them. He hides caches of weapons on Navajo land, then leads the army to find them. He claims we are preparing for war. It gives the government an excuse to break the treaty, to take the rest of the land, to take the water." Clary felt a chill that had nothing to do with the flour on her skin. It was a manufactured war. Crow was painting a target on innocent people to clear the way for investors. "I have to get the book to Elder Hosteen," Kai said. "He is at the Canyon Stronghold. He knows a judge in Santa Fe who is not bought by the railroad men, and I need to find Jesse Hart." "The scout?" Clary asked. "He drinks too much." He drinks to forget what he saw the army do," Kai said. "But he is honest. He can guide me through the pass." Clary looked around the barn. This was her home. The smell of the hay, the sound of the river, the memories of her father. But it was already gone. Pike had killed it with a piece of paper. "You cannot make it to the canyon alone," Clary said. "Not with that wound. You will fall off your horse in 10 miles. "I will crawl if I have to," Kai said. "No," Clary said. She stood up straighter. "We will ride." Kai stared at her. "Clary, if you leave with me, there is no coming back. You become a fugitive, a traitor to your race. They will hunt you down like a dog. They are already hunting me." Clary said, "They are hunting my spirit. Pike wants to buy me like a broodmare. Crow wants to silence me. Staying here is not living. Kai, it is just waiting to die slowly." She walked over to Dusty, her roan gelding, and began to stroke his nose. "I choose the risk. I choose the wide open sky, and I choose to help you stop them." Kai watched her, and for the first time, a slow smile touched his lips. It transformed his face, softening the hard angles of the warrior into something younger, something hopeful. "Then we pack," he said. "Light, only what we need to survive." The sun set, turning the sky a bruised purple. Clary moved through the house like a phantom. She packed dried beef, coffee, a bag of cornmeal, and her father's heavy wool coat. She took the shotgun from above the mantel and a box of shells. She wrote a letter to Aunt Mabel. "I am sorry, Auntie. I cannot be the payment for your peace. I love you. Do not look for me." She left it on the ledger, weighing it down with the silver dollar the miner had given her days ago. When the moon was obscured by drifting clouds, they moved. They saddled Dusty for Clary, for Kai. They took the old pack mule, Bessie. She was stubborn, but she was sure-footed and strong. It was a humble caravan for a hero's journey, but it was all they had. They led the animals out the back gate, wrapping the hooves in burlap sacks to muffle the sound on the rocky ground. The night was vast and silent, the desert stretching out like a sleeping ocean. But as they reached the edge of the property, a sound shattered the quiet. A dog barked. It was the neighbor's hound, a nasty brute that slept light. The bark was sharp, rhythmic, and loud. "Go!" Kai hissed, vaulting onto the mule with a grimace of pain. Clary swung into the saddle. Dusty danced sideways, sensing her tension. Lights flared in the windows of the town behind them. A shout echoed, then another. "They are awake," Clary said. "Ride!" Kai commanded. They kicked their mounts into a trot, then a gallop, abandoning stealth for speed. They headed away from the road, cutting straight toward the jagged silhouette of the ridge. The wind whipped Clary's hair across her face. She did not look back at the trading post. She looked forward, at the broad back of the Navajo warrior riding ahead of her, and at the darkness of the unknown territory beyond. They rode hard for an hour, the animals laboring as the ground began to rise. They reached the first crest of the rocky foothills, a place of tumbled boulders and shadow. Kai pulled up, signaling her to stop. The mule was heaving. Dusty was coated in foam. "Look," Kai said, pointing back the way they had come. Clary turned in the saddle. Far below, on the flat expanse of the valley floor, a snake of fire was moving. Torches, a dozen of them. They were moving fast, following the fresh tracks in the soft earth before they hit the rocks. Crow had not waited for noon. He had guessed. "They are coming," Clary whispered. "Let them come," Kai said. He met her gaze, his eyes fierce in the starlight. "We have the high ground now, and we have the truth." Clary touched the pocket where she had hidden the notebook. She felt a strange, wild exhilaration. She was 18 years old. She had a price on her head, and she had never felt more free. She turned her horse toward the mountains. "Lead the way, Kai." The high desert was an anvil, and the sun was the hammer. For 3 days, they rode deeper into the broken spine of the territory, leaving the familiar comforts of the river valley far behind. Here, the earth was stripped bare, a landscape of red rock spires and scrub brush that clung to life with desperate roots. Clary Whitlow had thought she knew the heat. She had lived in Arizona all her life, but this was different. This was a dry, sucking heat that pulled the moisture from her skin and cracked her lips until they bled. They moved in silence mostly, conserving energy. Kainez rode the mule, Bessie, saving the roan gelding strength for the difficult climbs, though often they both walked to spare the animals. Kai's wound was healing, but the heat sapped his strength. Yet, he never complained. He moved with a grim determination, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, the ridgeline, the dirt. He was teaching her to see. "Look," Kai said, halting the mule near a cluster of dry mesquite. He pointed to the ground. "What do you see?" Clary squinted at the hard-packed earth. "Dirt, rocks, lizard tracks." "Look closer," Kai said. "See the disturbance in the dust, the way the pebbles are scattered to the left." Clary leaned down. She saw it, then a faint scuff mark, barely visible. Something dragged here. "A rattlesnake," Kai said. Heading for the shade of that rock, we walk around. He taught her to find water where there seemed to be none, digging into the sandy bed of a dry wash until damp earth appeared, then waiting for the slow seep of muddy liquid that tasted like iron but saved their lives. He taught her to read the wind, to smell the rain before the clouds even formed over the peaks. In return, during the long, cold nights when the temperature plummeted enough to freeze water in the canteen, Clary opened the notebook. "This word," she said, pointing to a scrawl next to a date. "It says consignment." Kai looked at the letters, his brow furrowed. "What does it mean?" "It means a batch of goods sent to be sold," Clary explained. "It is a business word. Crow uses it to make the weapon sound like flour or nails. He is hiding the violence in boring words." Kai looked at her, the firelight dancing in his dark eyes. "Words are dangerous, like arrows. You cannot pull them back once they are lost." "That is why we have to deliver this book," Clary said. "These words are the only arrows we have that can pierce Crow's armor." On the fourth night, they camped in a shallow depression beneath a shelf of sandstone. The wind was biting, carrying the chill of the high peaks. They had only one heavy wool blanket between them. Clary's father's coat was thick, but not enough for the ground freeze. They lay close to the small fire, the flames licking at a pile of dry sagebrush. Clary shivered, pulling her knees to her chest. "Come," Kai said. It was not a command, but an offer. He lifted the edge of the blanket. Clary hesitated for only a heartbeat. The cold was a physical pain. She scooted closer, turning her back to him so they could spoon together for warmth. He settled the blanket over them, his arm resting tentatively over her waist, careful not to press too hard, careful of the boundaries they had silently drawn. But the warmth of him was overwhelming. It seeped through her clothes, thawing the chill in her bones. She could feel the steady rise and fall of his chest against her back. She could smell the smoke in the sage and the man. She turned in his arms, facing him. The fire was dying down, casting deep shadows across his face. He was watching her, his expression unreadable, but his eyes were intense, focused entirely on her mouth. Clary reached out, her fingers tracing the sharp line of his jaw. His skin was rough with stubble. He flinched slightly, then leaned into her touch, closing his eyes. "You are shaking," he whispered. "Not from the cold," Clary murmured. She moved closer, until there was no space left between them. The air around them seemed to crackle. She felt a pull, magnetic and terrifying, a desire to bridge the gap between their two worlds. She tilted her face up. Kai looked at her, his gaze searching. He did not move to take. He waited. "If you do not want this," Clary whispered, her voice trembling, "tell me. I will stop." Kai did not speak. Instead, he brought his hand up to cup the back of her head, his fingers threading through her tangled hair. He lowered his head slowly, giving her every second to pull away. When his lips touched hers, it was tentative at first, a question asked in the dark. Clary sighed, her hands gripping the front of his shirt, pulling him closer. The kiss deepened, becoming urgent, a desperate affirmation of life in the midst of the vast, empty wilderness. It was the taste of coffee and dust and longing. It was the feeling of being found. They broke apart breathless, foreheads resting against each other. Kai's hand moved to her waist, his thumb stroking the curve of her hip through the fabric of her skirt. "We are playing a dangerous game. Clary Whitlow," he murmured against her skin. "I am tired of playing safe," she replied. But beneath the bravado, fear gnawed at her. As she drifted off to sleep in his arms, the doubts crept in. Was she just a foolish girl, caught up in a romantic tragedy of her own making? Was she dragging this man, who had already lost so much, into a trap? Kai was awake long after her breathing evened out. He looked at the rim of the canyon above them. He terrified himself. He had spent years hardening his heart, turning himself into a weapon for his people. Now, this girl, this fierce, stubborn, soft-hearted girl was making him want things he could not afford. A home, a future. If Crow caught them, he would use Clary to break him. Kai tightened his grip on the knife at his belt. He would not let that happen. The next day brought a new threat. They were traversing a narrow trail that wound through a forest of stunted pine when Kai suddenly pulled the mule to a halt. He signaled for Clary to be silent. A rider was approaching from the east, a lone man on a tall bay horse. Clary reached for the shotgun in the scabbard on her saddle. "Wait," Kai said softly. "I know that seat. I know that hat." The rider came into view. He was an older man, his face a map of wrinkles and sunspots, wearing a battered hat and a vest covered in pockets. He rode with a slouch that belied a sharp alertness. "Jesse," Clary breathed. It was Jesse Hart, the mail carrier and sometime scout who moved between the towns and the reservation like a tumbleweed. He was a man who drank too much whiskey to drown the memories of the Indian Wars, but he had never been known to lie. Jesse pulled his horse up 10 yards away. He looked at Kai, then at Clary. He did not smile. "Well," Jesse said, his voice like gravel grinding together, "I figured I would find you two on this trail. If you are still breathing, are you tracking us for Crow, Jesse?" Kai asked, his hand resting near his gun. "Crow does not pay enough for me to ride into Navajo country," Jesse spat. He reached into his saddlebag. Clary tensed, raising the shotgun barrel slightly. Jesse pulled out a folded piece of paper and tossed it onto the ground between them. "But he is paying enough for everyone else," Jesse said. Clary slid off her horse and picked up the paper. It was a poster. Fresh ink. Wanted. It read in bold, black letters. For murder and treason, the Navajo renegade Kai Nez and his accomplice, Clara Whitlow. Below her name, it read, "Assisting a fugitive, theft of government property, dangerous." Clary stared at the words. Her name, her father's name, dragged through the mud. She was no longer just a girl who ran away. She was an outlaw. The town she had grown up in, the people she had served coffee to, they would look at this paper and see a monster. "He says you helped this buck kill a man down by the river," Jesse said, watching her face. "Says you stole a payroll shipment." "He lies," Clary said, her voice shaking with rage. "He is the thief. Jesse, he's running guns and whiskey. We have the proof." She pulled the notebook from her pocket and held it up. Jesse looked at the book, then at Kai. He sighed, a long, weary sound. "I figured it was something like that. Crow has been too eager to start a war. He wants that land cleared for the copper company." "Will you help us?" Kai asked. "We need to get this to Elder Hosteen, then to Santa Fe." Jesse rubbed his jaw. "I am an old man. Kai, I do not have much fight left in me." "We do not need you to fight," Clary said. "We need you to witness. You are a white man. They will listen to you." Jesse looked at Clary. He saw the girl who used to give him extra sugar in his coffee. He saw the fear in her eyes, and the steel behind it. "Damn it," Jesse muttered. "All right, I am heading to the canyon anyway, but we ride fast. Crow has a posse out, and he has hired Vernon Pike's boys. They are not looking to arrest anyone. They are looking to bury problems." They rode together, the presence of the third rider offering a strange comfort. But the tension remained high. The landscape grew more rugged, forcing them into a narrow ravine where the walls of red rock rose high on either side, blocking out the sun. "Keep your eyes up," Kai warned, scanning the rim of the canyon. "This is a choke point." The crack of the rifle shot echoed before the sound reached them. Dirt sprayed up near Dusty's hooves. The horse reared, screaming. Clary fought the reins, nearly thrown from the saddle. "Ambush!" Jesse yelled, wheeling his horse around. Another shot rang out. This one struck a rock inches from Kai's head, sending stone splinters flying. "Up there!" Kai pointed to a cluster of boulders on the north rim. 3 men. Clary could see the glint of sun on the metal. They were Pike's men, rough laborers turned hired guns. They had the high ground. "Get to cover!" Kai shouted. He slapped the rump of Clary's horse, sending her bolting toward an overhang of rock. He did not follow. Instead, he slid from the mule, rifle in hand, and rolled behind a fallen log. He moved with fluid, lethal grace, sighting his weapon and firing in one motion. One of the men on the rim cried out and ducked back. "Pin them down!" Jesse shouted, firing his revolver wildly at the rocks. Clary scrambled off her horse, clutching the shotgun. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely hold the weapon. This was not shooting at tin cans on a fence post. These were men. She peered around the edge of the overhang. She saw Kai moving. He was advancing, using the cover of the brush to flank them. But he was exposing himself. One of the gunmen on the rim popped up. He had a clear line of sight on Kai, who was reloading. The man leveled his Winchester. Kai did not see him. Time seemed to slow down. Clary saw the man's finger tightening on the trigger. She saw Kai, focused on the other two attackers. She did not think. She did not weigh the moral cost. She simply acted. Clary stepped out from the cover. She raised the heavy shotgun to her shoulder. She did not aim for the man's head. She aimed for the center of mass, just as her father had taught her. Breathe. Squeeze. Boom. The kick of the shotgun bruised her shoulder. The roar was deafening in the confined space of the ravine. The spread of buckshot hit the gunman. He was blown backward as if yanked by an invisible rope. He fell from the rock, landing with a sickening thud on the canyon floor below. Silence followed the blast. The other two gunmen, seeing their companion fall and facing the combined fire of three people, decided the paycheck was not worth it. They scrambled back and disappeared over the ridge. Clary lowered the gun. Smoke curled from the barrel. She stared at the body of the man lying in the dirt 50 yards away. He was not moving. She felt sick. A wave of nausea rolled over her, and she dropped the gun, falling to her knees. She looked at her hands. They felt stained, though there was no blood on them. Kai was beside her in an instant. He did not touch her at first. He kicked the shotgun away slightly, ensuring it was safe, then knelt in the dirt. "Clary," he said. "I killed him," she whispered. Her voice sounded foreign to her ears. "I killed a man." "You saved me," Kai said. "I took a life," she choked out, tears finally spilling over. I am a murderer, just like the poster says." Kai took her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. His eyes were hard, devoid of pity, but full of understanding. "Look at me," he commanded. "This is the world Crow made, not you. In this place, survival has a price. You paid it today. Do not let it break you. If you break, they win." "It hurts," she sobbed. "It should hurt," Kai said. "If it did not hurt, you would be like them." He pulled her into his chest. Clary buried her face in his shirt, sobbing into the rough fabric. He held her while she shook, offering no empty platitudes, only the solid reality of his presence. He was alive because of her. That was the only truth that mattered. Jesse rode up, looking grim. He glanced at the body, then at the weeping girl. He tipped his hat back and sighed. "We need to move. The shots will draw more of them." They rode on, but the air had changed. The innocence that had clung to Clary, the girl who sold flour and read Dickens, was gone. In her place was a woman who rode with a shotgun across her lap, her eyes shadowed by the knowledge of death. By late afternoon, the landscape shifted again. The red rocks gave way to towering sandstone cliffs and deep, verdant canyons. They were entering the Navajo stronghold. They were met by sentries, silent men on painted ponies who appeared out of the earth like spirits. They saw Kai and lowered their bows, but their eyes lingered on Clary and Jesse with distrust. They were led to a camp tucked against a sheer cliff wall. In the center, sitting by a fire, was an old man. His hair was white as snow, his face etched with 1,000 lines of history. He wore a blanket wrapped around his shoulders and a heavy silver necklace. Elder Hosteen. Kai dismounted and approached the elder with reverence. He spoke in the Navajo tongue, soft, guttural sounds that flowed like water over stones. He gestured to his wound, then to the notebook, and finally to Clary. Clary stood by her horse, feeling the weight of 100 eyes on her. She felt small, dirty, and marked by violence. Elder Hosteen stood up. He walked slowly toward her. He stopped a few feet away, his black eyes boring into hers. It was a test. He was looking for fear. He was looking for the deceit of the white men who had come before. Clary did not look away. She held his gaze. Her chin lifted slightly. She had ridden through hell. She had shot a man, and she had given up her life for the truth. She had nothing left to hide. The elder looked at her for a long time. Then, he looked at the necklace of turquoise beads hanging from his own neck. He did not smile, but the hardness around his eyes softened. "You have walked a hard road, granddaughter," he said in perfect, accented English. "Sit, eat. You are safe here." Clary let out a breath she didn't know she was holding, but the relief was short-lived. As dusk fell, a scout rode into the camp. His horse lathered. He spoke urgently to Kai and the elder. Kai turned to Clary, his face grim. "Crow is not just chasing us," Kai said. "The scout says he has a column of men, 20 deputies, and he has a paper from the territorial governor, a warrant." "For us?" Clary asked. "For the tribe," Kai said. "He is claiming the Navajo are harboring dangerous insurrectionists. He has legal authority to enter the reservation and use force. He is bringing the war to my people's doorstep because of us." Clary looked at the families in the camp, the children playing by the fires, the women weaving. Because she had saved one man, she had endangered them all. "Then we have to stop him," Clary said. "How?" Jesse asked, spitting tobacco into the fire. "He has the law on his side. Then we need better law," Clary said. She clutched the notebook. "We have the truth. We just have to make it loud enough to be heard." The morning sun did not rise. It bled into the sky, a bruise of purple and angry crimson over the eastern peaks. The air in the canyon was still, holding its breath before the inevitable violence. At the edge of the Navajo land, where the river widened into a treacherous ford, Deputy Silas Crow had assembled his theater of war. He had not come quietly. He had come with the thunder of hooves and the arrogance of a man who believed the law was a garment he could wear to cover any sin. 20 men sat on horseback on the far bank. They were a mix of deputized drifters, hard-eyed mercenaries on Vernon Pike's payroll, and a few frightened townspeople who had been conscripted under the guise of civic duty. In the center, Crow sat tall on a white stallion, a flag of the United States fluttering from a pole held by the man beside him. It was a grotesque performance of legitimacy. Clary Whitlow stood on the near bank, her boots sinking into the red mud. She was no longer the girl who had trembled behind a counter. She wore a borrowed buckskin jacket over her torn dress, and her hair was braided back, tight and severe. In her hands, she did not hold a ledger, but the battered notebook that could hang half the men across the water. Beside her stood Kai Nez. He had foregone the bandages, though Clary knew his side still ached. He was painted for war, not the savage caricature the penny dreadfuls described, but subtle streaks of black ash under his eyes to deflect the glare of the sun. He stood relaxed, his rifle resting easily in the crook of his arm, but Clary could feel the coiled tension in him, a mountain lion waiting to spring. The night before, the air had been different. They had sat by the dying embers of the fire in the elders' camp. The silence between them had been heavy with things unsaid. Kai had reached into a pouch at his belt and pulled out a string of beads. They were rough-cut turquoise, the color of a desert sky at noon, strung on a simple leather thong. "In my culture," Kai had said, his voice low and rough like grinding stones, "turquoise is the stone of the falling sky. It is protection. It is healthy." He had reached out and taken her hand, pressing the cool stones into her palm. "I do not give this to you, Clary," he had told her, his eyes locking onto hers. "I know the white men give rings to bind a woman to a house. I give you this so you remember that you have a choice. You chose to save me. You chose to ride. Whatever happens tomorrow, remember that your spirit belongs only to you." Clary had tied the beads around her wrist. They felt heavy, anchoring her. "I am not going back, Kai, not the way it was." "I know," he had said. And then, in the darkness, he had kissed her forehead a benediction, or perhaps a goodbye. Now, in the harsh light of morning, the memory of that touch was the only thing keeping her hands steady. Kai Nezi Crow's voice boomed across the rushing water. He had a natural projection, a politician's gift. And Miss Whitlow, I have a warrant here, signed by the governor of the territory. You are ordered to surrender immediately. On what charges? Jesse Hart shouted back. The old scout stood slightly ahead of Clary, his hand hovering over his revolver. Murder, Crow yelled. The murder of a federal agent, theft of government property, and inciting a rebellion. He is lying, Clary screamed. Her voice was thinner than Crow's, but it cut through the noise of the river. There was no federal agent. There were only smugglers. Crow laughed, a dry, sharp sound. You hear that? Boys, the poor girl has been brainwashed by the savage. She does not know what she is saying. He turned his gaze to the line of Navajo warriors standing silently on the ridge behind Kai. Elder Hosteen, surrender the fugitives, and no harm will come to your people. Refuse, and the United States Army will consider this an act of war. I cannot hold these men back if you resist. It was the ultimate bluff. He was using the threat of the army who were miles away and unaware of this to force a slaughter. Kai stepped forward. He did not shout. He waited until the wind carried his voice. There is no rebellion, Crow. Only a thief with a badge. Crow's face darkened. He raised his hand. Take them dead or alive. The deputies spurred their horses forward, splashing into the ford. The water was high, swirling around the horses' knees, gray and churning with the meltwater from the high peaks. Wait! The shout came not from the defenders, but from the attackers. Vernon Pike rode his heavy draft horse out of the line, cutting off Crow's path. The merchant looked sweaty and desperate, his eyes darting to the notebook in Clary's hand. Hold your fire, Pike screamed. Get out of the way! Vernon! Crow snarled. We are finishing this. You are finishing nothing until I get that book, Pike yelled, his face purple. He turned to Clary. Girl, you give me that ledger, you give it to me, and I will pay off your aunt's debt. I will give you $1,000 in gold. You can go anywhere. Do not listen to him, Crow shouted, drawing his revolver. He is trying to buy his own neck out of a noose, and you are trying to bury yours. Pike wheeled his horse, pointing a shaking finger at the deputy. I know what you are doing. Silas, you want to kill them so nobody sees the names in that book. My name is in there. If you kill them and the book goes into the river, I am safe. But if you arrest them, if that book goes to a judge... Pike realized his mistake too late. He had said the quiet part out loud. Crow did not hesitate. He leveled his Colt Peacemaker and fired. The shot cracked through the canyon. Pike jerked, clutching his shoulder, and fell from his horse into the shallow water. He is a traitor, Crow screamed to his confused men. He is working with the Indians. Kill them all. The betrayal shattered the line. The mercenaries, sensing the payout was disappearing, opened fire, but they were not shooting at the Navajo. They were shooting at each other, confused by the sudden turn. Now, Kai shouted. He did not charge. He signaled to the warriors on the ridge. They did not fire bullets. They fired arrows, arcing high, landing in the water in front of the horses to spook them. It was a tactic of disruption, not massacre. Clary, read it, Kai commanded. Let them hear the truth. Clary stepped onto a large flat rock at the water's edge. Bullets kicked up dirt yards away, but she did not flinch. She opened the black notebook. August 12th, she screamed, her voice finding a strength she did not know she possessed. 400 crates of whiskey delivered to Vernon Pike, signed Silas Crow. The men in the river hesitated. A few lowered their guns. September 1st, Clary read, turning the page. 500 Springfield rifles stolen from Fort Defiance, hidden in Sector 4, signed Silas Crow. Shut her up, Crow roared, spurring his white horse into the deeper water. Shoot her. He raised his gun, aiming directly at Clary. Kai moved. He did not fire his rifle. He tackled Clary, knocking her off the rock just as a bullet chipped the stone where her head had been. They rolled together into the sand. Stay down, Kai hissed. He rolled to his knees and fired a single shot. He did not aim for Crow. He aimed for the wooden support of the temporary bridge the smugglers had built weeks ago, a rickety structure of logs and rope that spanned the deepest part of the channel. The bullet struck the tension rope, but nature had its own timing. A low, grinding rumble echoed from upstream, louder than the gunfire. The men in the water looked up. "Flood!" Jesse screamed. "Get back!" The dam of debris that had been building up in the Narrows miles upstream, the result of the storm that had brought Clary and Kai together, finally gave way. A wall of water, 3 feet high and moving with the force of a freight train, came rushing around the bend. It hit the ford with a deafening roar. The deputies and mercenaries scrambled back to the far bank, their horses screaming in panic. But Crow was too far out. He was in the middle of the channel, obsessed with silencing the girl. The wall of water hit the bridge supports just as the white stallion lost its footing. The structure groaned and shattered, sending logs the size of battering rams tumbling into the current. Crow's horse was swept away instantly. The deputy was thrown clear, flailing in the churning brown foam. "Help!" Crow screamed. His dignity washed away in a second. "Help me!" He managed to grab onto the wreckage of the bridge, a tangle of rope and timber that had snagged on a midstream boulder. But the water was rising fast. The log he was holding was shifting. He was going to be crushed or drowned within seconds. The firing had stopped. Everyone, Navajo, townspeople, mercenaries, watched in stunned silence as the river claimed its due. Kai stood up, brushing the sand from his chest. He looked at the man who had hunted him like an animal. He looked at the water that was eager to finish the job. He lowered his rifle. "Let the river have him," Kai said softly. "It is justice." Clary stood up beside him. She looked at Crow. The man was terrified, his eyes wide white orbs in a face mask of mud. He was a murderer. He was a liar. He would have killed her without a second thought. But she looked at the notebook lying in the sand. If Crow died, he became a martyr, a brave lawman killed by savages and a traitorous girl. The truth would be buried with him. The town would build a statue, and they would burn the reservation in revenge. "No," Clary said. She grabbed the coil of rope from Kai's saddlebag, the same rope she had used to pull Kai from the river. "Clary, do not," Kai said, grabbing her arm. "He is not worth the risk." "I am not doing it for him," Clary said, her eyes blazing. "I am doing it for the truth. If he dies, the lie lives. I want him to answer for what he did." She pulled away from Kai. She ran to the edge of the roaring water. It was a mirror of that first night. The same fear, the same raging river, the same choice. But this time, she was saving the monster. She swung the rope. She had practiced this with her father 1,000 times, lassoing fence posts. She threw it. The loop sailed through the spray and landed squarely over Crow's head and shoulders. "Grab it!" Clary screamed. Crow, desperate and choking, scrambled to grip the rope. "Pull!" Clary yelled to Kai. "Help me pull!" Kai looked at her. He saw the fire in her. He saw that she was right. Justice was not revenge. Justice was the hard, cold light of day. He stepped behind her, grabbing the rope. Together, they heaved. The former fought them. It wanted to keep Crow. It pulled until the rope burned Clary's palms, reopening the scars from weeks ago. She gritted her teeth, digging her boots into the sand. "Heave!" Jesse shouted, running to join them, with 3 of them pulling. Crow was dragged through the boiling water. He tumbled over the rocks, gasping and retching, until he was hauled up onto the muddy bank at Clary's feet. He lay there, looking like a drowned rat, stripped of his power, his hat gone, his fine uniform ruined. Clary stood over him, her chest heaving. She held the notebook in one hand and the rope in the other. Crow coughed up water, rolling onto his back. He looked up at Clary, then at the circle of silent Navajo warriors who had gathered around. He looked at the deputies on the other bank, who were watching with expressions of disgust and realization. Jesse Hart stepped forward. He pulled a pair of iron cuffs from his belt. Old Army issue. He clicked them onto Crow's wrists. "Silas Crow," Jesse said, his voice ringing out. "You are under arrest for treason, murder, and being a general son of a bitch." Crow struggled to sit up. He looked at Clary, his eyes narrowing. Even now, beaten and bound, he tried to exert control. "You realize what you have done," Crow spat, though his voice was weak. "You have ruined yourself, girl. You defended a savage. You attacked a lawman. You think you can go back to selling flour. You belong to Rattler's Ford. You belong to the town. You will never be anything else." Clary looked down at him. She touched the turquoise beads on her wrist. She looked at Kai, who was standing just behind her, his hand resting on the hilt of his knife, ready to defend her, but letting her fight her own battle. She looked back at the town that was just a smudge of smoke in the distance, the town that had tried to sell her to pay a debt, the town that had believed the lies because they were convenient. "You are wrong, Silas," Clary said. Her voice was calm, carrying the weight of the mountains and the river. "I do not belong to the town. I do not belong to my aunt's debt. And I certainly do not belong to you." She looked at Kai, and a small, fierce smile touched her lips. "I belong to no one," she said. "I belong to the truth, and right now, the truth is holding the rope." She turned to Jesse. "Take him to Santa Fe. Jesse." "Take the book. Make sure everyone reads it." "I will," Jesse said, hauling Crow to his feet. Across the river, the mercenaries turned their horses and rode away. The pay was gone. The fight was over. The floodwaters rushed on, cleansing the canyon, carrying the wreckage of the bridge down toward the sea, leaving the path clear for something new to be built. The adrenaline that had sustained Clary through the confrontation at the river did not fade slowly. It crashed like the floodwaters themselves, leaving behind a hollow, aching silence. The canyon, which only an hour ago had echoed with the crack of gunfire and the roar of the collapsing bridge, was now eerily quiet. The river rushed on, indifferent to the lives it had nearly claimed. But the human noise, the shouting, the posturing, the violence had been swallowed by the vastness of the landscape. Clary sat on a flat rock near the water's edge, her hands resting on her knees. She looked down at her palms. The rope had left angry red welts across her skin, raw and stinging, a physical memory of the weight of Silas Crow. She had saved him. She had saved the man who would have seen her hanged without a blink. The moral weight of that choice sat heavy in her gut, a mix of nausea and a strange, cold clarity. She had not let the river make her a murderer by omission. She had chosen who she was, even when the world tried to transform her into something else. Kai approached her silently. He did not speak at first. He simply handed her a canteen of water. Clary took it, her hands trembling slightly. She drank, the cool liquid washing away the taste of dust and fear. "He is gone," Kai said softly. He gestured toward the trail leading south. Clary looked up. Jesse Hart and two of the Navajo scouts were leading Silas Crow away. The deputy was slumped in the saddle of a spare horse, his hands bound behind him, his head bowed. He looked small. Stripped of his badge and his bluster, he was just a wet, shivering man facing the consequences of his greed. "And Pike?" Clary asked, her voice rasping. "Stopped," Kai said. "By his own men. They caught him trying to sneak away through the erratic boulders near the pass. It seems his hired guns were not pleased to find out their payment was disappearing. They stripped him of his boots and his horse and left him for the marshal to find. He will not be running anything but a jail cell for a long time." "So it is over," Clary whispered. "The fighting is over," Kai corrected. "Now comes the living. That is often the harder part." They returned to the stronghold as the sun began to dip below the canyon walls, painting the red rock in shades of burning orange and deep violet. The mood in the camp was subdued. There was relief, yes, but also the lingering scent of danger. The people knew that while Crow was defeated, the world that had sent him was still out there, hungry and encroaching. Clary felt a sudden, crushing exhaustion. She had stepped out of her life, the life of ledgers and flour sacks and Aunt Mabel's worried glances, and into a world where death was a constant companion. She felt like a piece of china that had been broken and glued back together. She was whole, but the cracks were visible. and she would never ring the same way again. Later that evening, a rider arrived from the direction of Rattler's Ford. It was not a threat, but a messenger. He brought a letter from Aunt Mabel, passed along by a sympathetic neighbor. Clary took the envelope. It was stained with dirt and smelled of lavender water, the scent of the trading post. She opened it by the firelight. "My dearest Clary," it read in Mabel's shaky script. "We heard what happened. The town is in shock. They say Crow was a criminal. I did not know. Clary, I truly did not know. Please, come home. Pike is gone. The debt can be managed. We can go back to how it was. I will bake your favorite cake. Just come back to safety." Clary read the words twice. A week ago, this letter would have been a lifeline. Now, it felt like a cage disguised as a hug. Go back to how it was. That was an impossible request. She could not unsee the corruption. She could not unfeel the weight of the shotgun in her hands. She could not unknow the freedom of the high desert. She folded the letter and put it in her pocket. "She wants you to return," Kai said. He was standing on the other side of the fire, watching her. "She wants the niece who existed last week." Clary said, "That girl is gone." Kai walked around the fire. He stopped a few feet from her. The flames cast dancing shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the depth of his dark eyes. He looked tired, the strain of the wound and the battle evident in the set of his shoulders. But his gaze was steady. "And what do you want, Clary?" he asked. The question hung in the air, simple and terrifying. "I do not know," she admitted. "I just know I cannot go back to being quiet. I cannot go back to letting men like Pike decide my worth." "You are free," Kai said. "Crow is gone. The charges will be dropped when the notebook is read. You could go to Santa Fe. You could go east. You could find a life where you never have to hold a gun again." "Is that what you want me to do?" Clary asked, looking him in the eye. Kai looked away, toward the dark outline of the cliffs. "I am a man with a target on his back. Clary, even with Crow gone, I am still Navajo in a territory that wants us gone. My life is this dirt, this fight. It is not a soft life. I would not ask you to share it if you desired peace." Clary stepped closer to him. She reached out and took his hand. His fingers were rough, warm, and real. "I had peace," Clary said. "It felt suffocating. I do not want soft Kai. I want it to be true." Kai looked back at her. The conflict in his eyes, the war between his desire to protect her and his desire to be with her, was plain to see. "I cannot promise you safety," he said, his voice rough. "I cannot promise you a house with glass windows or a life without fear." "I am not asking for promises," Clary said. "I am asking for a partner." He stared at her for a long moment, searching her face for any sign of hesitation, finding none. He let out a breath that sounded like a surrender. "Come," he said. He led her away from the communal fires, to a small structure set apart from the rest of the camp. It was a hogan, built of cedar logs and packed earth, simple and solid. It belonged to a cousin who was away shepherding in the high pastures. Inside, it was warm and smelled of sage and sheepskin. A small fire burned in the center pit, casting a golden glow over the woven rugs on the floor. It was intimate, enclosed, a world away from the vast, exposing sky. Kai closed the heavy wooden door, shutting out the wind. He turned to face her. In the quiet of the hogan, the energy between them shifted. The adrenaline of survival gave way to something softer, deeper, and infinitely more dangerous. He stepped close to her, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. His thumb brushed over her skin, tracing the line of her jaw. "You are beautiful," he whispered, as if the words were being pulled from him against his will. "Not like a flower, like the lightning." Clary leaned into his touch. "And you are the storm," she murmured. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not like the kiss in the cold desert night. That had been desperate, clinging to life. This was slow, deliberate. It was a question asked and answered in the language of breath and touch. Clary's hands moved to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath the cotton shirt. She felt the heat of him, the solid reality of his presence. She unbuttoned his shirt, her fingers brushing against the bandage on his side. "Does it hurt?" she whispered. "I do not feel it," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "I only feel you." He pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her flush against him. Clary gasped softly at the contact. Every nerve in her body was singing. She felt cherished, not owned. She felt seen, not assessed. "Clary," he said against her lips, his voice ragged. "If you want me to stop, tell me now, because in a moment, I will not want to let you go." "Do not let go," Clary whispered. "Never let go." She pulled him down onto the piled sheepskins and blankets. The firelight flickered over them, painting their skin in shades of amber and gold. There was no rush, no frantic grasping. There was only the slow, reverent exploration of two people who had faced death and chosen life. He was gentle with her, treating her as if she were something precious. Yet he touched her with a passion that left her breathless. When his skin touched hers, it felt like coming home to a place she had never known she was missing. In the sanctuary of the Hogan, with the wind singing outside. Clary Whitlow finally let go of the girl she had been and embraced the woman she was becoming, a woman who loved, and was loved, in equal measure. The darkness of the night wrapped around them, not as a threat, but as a blanket. The world outside faded away until there was nothing left but the two of them, the firelight, and the soft, steady rhythm of two hearts beating as one. The morning sun broke over the canyon rim, sharp and bright, dispelling the shadows of the night. Clary woke to the smell of coffee and wood smoke. She lay for a moment in the warmth of the blankets, watching the dust motes dance in the shaft of light falling through the smoke hole. She felt different, lighter, anchored. She dressed and went outside. Kai was already there, sitting by the fire with Elder Hosteen. They were speaking in Navajo, their voices low and melodic. When Clary approached, they stopped. Kai looked at her, and the warmth in his eyes made her cheeks flush. He did not say anything, but the slight nod he gave her spoke volumes. Elder Hosteen gestured for her to sit. He poured a cup of coffee from a battered tin pot and handed it to her. "The sun brings new eyes," the elder said. "How does the world look to you today, granddaughter?" "It looks wide," Clary said, "and a little frightening." "Good," Hosteen said. "Fear keeps you awake. Comfort makes you sleep." He looked at Kai, then back at Clary. "You have bound your threads together. This is a strong weave. But remember, a weave needs tension to hold its shape. Do not try to be the same thread. Be two threads, pulling against each other to make the fabric strong." "I understand," Clary said. "Destiny is not a rope that ties you," Hosteen continued, tapping his chest. "It is a path. It is only a path if two people choose to walk it side by side. If one carries the other, the path ends. If one drags the other, the path ends. You must walk." Later that morning, Jesse Hart prepared to leave. He was heading to Santa Fe to deliver Crow and the notebook to the federal marshal. He checked the cinch on his saddle, then turned to Clary. "Well," Jesse said, tipping his hat back, "I reckon this is where the trail splits." "Thank you, Jesse," Clary said, "for everything." "Don't thank me yet," Jesse grunted. "I have a proposition for you." "A proposition?" "With Pike gone and Crow in chains, the freight lines are going to be a mess." Jesse said, "The mail still needs to run. The supplies still need to move. I am too old to manage the books and the routes. I can ride, but I cannot organize." He looked at her meaningfully. "I need a partner. Someone who can read, write, and handle numbers. Someone who knows the territory and does not scare easily. Someone who can run the logistics from a central point, maybe a post out here, near the pass, instead of in town." Clary stared at him. "You are offering me a job." "I'm offering you a business," Jesse corrected. "Legitimate, independent. You run the books, I run the road. We split the profits 50-50. No debts, no husbands required." Clary looked at Kai. He was standing by the corral, listening. He did not interfere. He simply nodded, a silent affirmation of her choice. I I would like that, Jessie, Clary said, a smile breaking across her face. I would like that very much. Good, Jessie said. I will be back in 2 weeks with the paperwork. We will set up a way station near the big cottonwood at the river fork, neutral ground. Before he left, Clary sat down on a rock with a piece of charcoal and a scrap of paper she had saved. She wrote a reply to Aunt Mabel. Dearest Auntie, I am safe. I am happy. I cannot come back to Rattler's Ford. The town is too small for the life I need to live. Do not worry about the debt. The new freight line will pay it off within the year. I will send money every month. Keep the store, keep the house, but do not keep a place for me. I have found my own place. I still love you, but I will not live small just to make others feel comfortable. I have walked through the fire, Auntie, and I like who I am on the other side. Love, Clary. She gave the letter to Jessie. He tucked it into his saddlebag, tipped his hat to Kai, and rode out of the canyon, the dust swirling behind him. Clary walked down to the river, where the water was now calm, flowing steadily over the red stones. She found Kai there. He was stripping the bark off a long, straight cedar pole. What are you doing? She asked. Kai stopped working. He wiped his brow with his forearm. He looked at the pole, then at the flat expanse of ground near the water, shaded by the canyon wall, but open to the morning sun. A winter camp needs a shelter, he said. The hogun is for my cousin. I am building something new. He did not look at her, focusing on the wood. I am building a cabin, not a big one, but strong, with a roof that does not leak. Clary watched him. She saw the uncertainty in his hands, the vulnerability in the way he did not demand her presence. Who is it for? She asked softly. Kai looked up then. It is for me, but there is room. It is a place where, if you wanted, you could stay. A place where you could keep your books, where you could watch the river. He paused, his voice dropping. It is not a cage, Clary. It is just a place to be. Clary walked over to him. She placed her hand on the cedar pole. Right next to his, it needs a window, she said, facing east, so we can see the sunrise. Kai exhaled, a sound of profound relief. A slow, brilliant smile spread across his face, lighting up his eyes. A window, he agreed, facing east. And a table, Clary added. For business. And a table, Kai said. He picked up his axe. Then we have work to do. Clary picked up a second pole, testing its weight. It was heavy, but she was strong. She looked at the man she loved, and at the spot of earth where they would build something that belonged only to them. The sound of the axe biting into the wood echoed through the canyon, not the sound of destruction, but the rhythmic, steady heartbeat of a new beginning. The sun climbed higher, warming the red earth. For the first time in a long time, the future did not look like a debt to be paid, but like a wide, open horizon waiting to be written. The winter of 1884 was hard, but it broke with a sudden, radiant gentleness that transformed the high desert. The snow that had capped the red rocks melted into rivulets that fed the Colorado River, turning the angry, churning beast of the flood season into a broad, singing ribbon of silver and green. Spring arrived not with a whisper, but with a riot of wildflowers. The sagebrush bloomed in dusty purples, and the cottonwoods along the banks burst into a vibrant, trembling green. The river, once a boundary of death and danger, had become the artery of life for the valley. It brought the water that fed the small patch of corn Kai had planted, and it brought the trade that Jessie Hart guided through the pass. Clary Whitlow stood in the doorway of the cabin they had built. It was sturdy, smelling of cedar pitch and honest work. The window faced east, just as she had asked, catching the first golden rays of the sun that spilled over the canyon walls. She wiped her hands on her apron. It was not the stained apron of a terrified girl hiding in a trading post. It was the badge of a woman who had built a home inside the cabin. The morning was already busy. 5 children sat on the woven rug, their dark eyes fixed on the small slate chalkboard Clary held. They were children from the nearby Navajo families, curious and bright, who had come to see the white woman who spoke their language with a clumsy but determined tongue. "C-A-T," Clary said, pointing to the letters. "Cat, cat," the children chorused, giggling at the sound. Clary smiled. She had thought her life would be ledgers and debt. Instead, it was this giving the gift of words to a generation that would need them to survive in a changing world. She was not just teaching them to read. She was teaching them that their voices mattered. Outside, the sound of hooves approached. Clary stepped out into the sunshine. Kai Nez was riding toward the cabin. He rode the roan gelding, Dusty, who looked sleek and well-fed on the spring grass. Beside him rode Jesse Hart, looking grayer but content, his saddlebags bulging with mail and orders. Kai dismounted with a fluid grace that still made Clary's breath catch. He wore a clean shirt, and the bandage was long gone from his side, leaving only a scar that he called his memory mark. He did not rush to her. He walked with the easy confidence of a man who knows he is welcome. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "The pass is clear," Kai said. "Jesse brought the supplies. No trouble on the road." "No trouble at all," Jesse called out, climbing down from his horse with a groan of stiff joints. "Seems the rats have scattered. Since Crow went to prison, the new marshal is actually interested in the law. Imagine that." Clary looked at Kai. "And the patrols." "Quiet," Kai said. "We met a cavalry unit near the border. They saluted us." "They know we are the ones keeping the peace now." It was a strange, hard-won victory. Kai was no longer the renegade in the shadows. By working with Jesse and the new freight line, he had become the guardian of the road. He protected the wagons from bandits, and in return, the wagons brought fair trade to the reservation. He had found a way to be a warrior without a war. "I have something for you," Jesse said, digging into his pocket. He handed Clary a letter. "From town. The widow Miller. Aunt Mabel." Clary took the envelope. She did not feel the old fear. She opened it and read the short note. It was an apology, stiff and formal, but genuine. Mabel wrote that the town had finally accepted the truth about Crow. People were embarrassed. Some were ashamed. They wanted Clary to know she could visit without fear. "They want to make peace," Clary said, folding the letter. "Do you want to go back?" Kai asked. He was watching her closely, as he always did when the past reached out to touch her. Clary looked at the cabin, at the children spilling out of the door to run down to the river, and at the man standing before her. She realized she did not need the town's forgiveness to feel whole. She did not need their permission to exist. "Maybe one day," Clary said. "But not today. I have a class to teach." Kai smiled, a slow, warm expression that lit up his face. "Good, because I need to show you something." He held out his hand. Clary took it. His grip was warm and rough, the calluses matching her own. They left Jesse to unload the mule and walked down the path toward the river. They walked in silence until they reached a bend in the water. Clary recognized it instantly. The old mesquite tree was still there, its roots gnarled and clinging to the bank. The water was lower now, clear and sparkling, but the memory of the raging flood was etched into the very shape of the land. This was the spot. This was where she had thrown the rope. This was where she had pulled a dying stranger from the dark water and pulled her own destiny in with him. Kai stopped and looked at the water. "I come here sometimes," he said quietly. "When the morning is quiet, I look at the water and I try to remember the man who fell in." "He was a brave man," Clary said. "He was a broken man." Kai corrected. "He was full of hate. He thought he had to fight the whole world alone. He thought death was the only freedom left." He turned to face her. The wind caught his dark hair, blowing it back from his face. "You did not just save a man that night, Clary," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved my path. You showed me that strength is not just about killing. It is about holding on when the current tries to take you." Clary felt tears prick her eyes. "And you showed me that I was not just a girl in a store. You showed me I could be the storm." Kai reached into his pocket. He pulled out the string of turquoise beads, the same ones he had given her on the night before the battle. He had restrung them on a stronger leather cord, adding a small silver clasp he must have traded for. He did not put it on her. He held it out, resting it in her open palm. "I told you once that this was not a chain," Kai said. "That is still true. I do not want to own you. Clary, I have seen what ownership does to land and to people." He looked at the cabin in the distance, then back at her. "If you ever want to leave, if the town calls you back, I will not keep you. I will saddle your horse and watch you go, and I will be grateful for every day you were here." He took a step closer. "But if you want to stay," he whispered, "I will build with you. I will build a life where you never have to be small again. I will walk beside you until the river runs dry." Clary looked at the beads. They were the color of the sky, the color of the water, the color of hope. She looked at the scar on his chest, visible at the open collar of his shirt. She looked at his eyes, which held the same fierce, protective light as the day they had ridden out of the barn. She picked up the necklace. With steady hands, she fastened it around her own neck. The cool stone settled against her skin, a weight that felt like freedom. "I am not going anywhere," Clary said. "My home is not a place on a map. Kai, my home is where you are." She reached into the deep pocket of her skirt and pulled out the small wooden box she had brought with her. Inside was the battered notebook, the evidence of Crow's crimes. It had been their shield and their weapon. Now, it was just history. She knelt by the roots of the mesquite tree. The soil was soft. She dug a small hole with her hands. "What are you doing?" Kai asked. "Burying the ghosts," Clary said. She placed the box on the earth and covered it over. She patted the dirt down. The truth had been told. Justice had been served. They did not need to carry the weight of it anymore. She stood up and brushed the dirt from her hands. She felt lighter, as if the last shackle of fear had finally snapped. Kai reached for her then. He pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, melting against him. He kissed her, and it tasted of the spring air and the promise of summer. It was a kiss of deep, abiding partnership. "I love you, Clary Whitlow," he said against her hair. "And I love you, Kai Nez," she replied. They stood there for a long time as the sun climbed higher. From the direction of the cabin, the sounds of the day drifted down to them, the rhythmic thwack-thwack of Jessie hammering a loose fence rail, the high, clear laughter of the children as they chased a lizard through the sagebrush, the smell of weak coffee boiling on the stove mixed with the scent of pine resin and wet earth. It was not a fairy tale. It was not a dime novel ending with a ride into the sunset. It was something better. It was real. It was the messy, beautiful, hard work of living a life you chose. "We should go back," Clary said, resting her head on his shoulder. "The children will be spelling dog by now, and Jesse will want his lunch." "Let them wait a moment," Kai said, holding her tighter. "Let the world wait." They stood side by side on the bank of the Colorado River. The water flowed past them, endless and enduring, carrying the melted snow from the high peaks down to the sea. They were two small figures in a vast, wild landscape, but they were no longer alone. They did not pull each other. They did not push. They simply turned together and began to walk back up the path toward the cabin, their shoulders touching, their steps falling into a natural rhythm. The West was still wild. The world was still hard. But for the first time in a long time, there was space in it for something gentle. Thank you so much for listening to the story. At 18, innocent girl pulls a Navajo warrior from the river, never thinking he'll make her his destiny. I truly hope you enjoyed this journey through the Wild West as much as I enjoyed writing it. Please leave a comment below and let me know where you are listening from. I would love to connect with you and hear your thoughts on Clary and Kai's story. If you want to hear more stories like this, please subscribe to my channel, Wild West Tales, like this video, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people. Thank you for your support.